Hi, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. I'm sorry we're a little bit late. We're entirely blaming Twitter because Andrew and I were communicating via DMs, and their DM system went down. So,
Yeah, like 5 minutes before we needed to talk.
yeah, it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. But luckily, I had Andrew's email, and we managed to sort it all out. So, thank you very much for all of your patience in the live chat. I know you were still there. You were all there amusing yourselves and talking amongst yourselves. So, I appreciate you guys. I have a great audience, and I'm very, very lucky and grateful for that. I talked to Andrew about this beforehand before we get into the conversation we're having today, and I'm not going to put a damper on it, or I'm going to try not to put a damper on it. I wanted to take a moment to, I'm not even sure how to parse this, to acknowledge my audience. I have taken over a week off. I've been off for over a week and a half because Sunday before last, as many of you know, I'm Nova Scotian. This is Halifax in my background. I live in Enfield, Nova Scotia, and something incredibly horrible and traumatic happened here in my province and in my town. And I was trying really hard to not be a mess, but it's very difficult. But I wanted to say that I'm sorry I've been away. I needed to take some time. I'm not going to go into exactly what happened. Anybody can Google Nova Scotia Strong or Nova Scotia in general right now and find out what took place. But I need to, and I'm not sure if apologize is the right word for being away, but I need to acknowledge the fact that I have been absent and also say thank you to all of the people who have reached out to me to make sure that myself and my son are doing okay and that the community is doing okay and have showed support. I appreciate you guys. It means the world to me. It helps more than you could even potentially conceivably realize in something so unprecedented happening. If anybody doesn't know what's going on and you follow me on Facebook, I detailed my personal experience on my Facebook, which is Shannon Q Tube. You can go there and read it. I'm not going to go into that now, but it merited mentioning. I didn't want to go into my first stream since without bringing it up because it was intense and it deserves acknowledgement, and you deserve acknowledgement for your support of me. So thank you. And I will leave it at that and focus. I will get focused. And I will say hello to Andrew, who has been incredibly gentle and patient, who was my first guest since and has been very understanding with me needing to express those emotions to my audience who have been so supportive of me. So Andrew, hi, welcome, and please tell everybody who you are.
well, well, thank
And I'm
you.
sorry.
No, definitely do not apologize. I mean, that is an earth-shattering trauma that you should acknowledge and you should take time away to deal with. And I think everybody who's going to be watching your channel certainly understands that. And I'm thrilled that you have that support and happy to be your first guest to come out on and talk about Christian nationalism and atheism and fighting back against people who want to take over our governments and tell people what they have to believe. That's what we're really fighting against. And welcome back to the fight after your much needed break, it sounds like.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It was a brief hiatus, but I'm ready. I'm back into it. I've got Nova Scotia behind me. I'm Nova Scotia strong. I'm ready to go. I am ready to go. So before we get into it, I have your book link in the description. So anybody who would like to can go check it out once they get familiar with you. So why don't you tell everybody like exactly who you are and what you do about your book and what you do with freedom from religion and who you are exactly.
Sure. So I'm Andrew Seidel. I am a constitutional attorney here in the United States. I work for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That's a nonprofit that has two purposes. We work to educate and to separate. So we work to educate the public about what it is to be a non-believer, an atheist, an agnostic, a freethinker, whatever label you decide to adopt, what it is to be a freethinker. And we work to separate, to keep state and church separate as the Constitution of the United States requires. So I'm an attorney with FFRF, and I do a lot of the legal work, and I'm also an author. I just had my first book published last May, so almost a year ago now. That's called The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. And it's been a really great year. I had a really fun book tour going on that has since been completely canceled and squashed, but
Yeah.
that's okay. We're all making sacrifices now, or most of us rather, I guess, are making sacrifices
Yeah.
right
Mm-hmm.
now. It's basically all about the idea that the United States is a Christian nation, but also a step farther. I'm trying to completely destroy this Christian nationalist identity that has carried Donald Trump into power.
Yeah. And if anybody isn't familiar with Andrew's book by name, you'll recognize it as the book that Greg Locke burned. That was so funny. You were
Yeah,
that's when I decided you were my hero, when you sent him a signed copy of your book. The foreword that you wrote to him in that book was amazing.
yeah. Greg Locke is a crazy preacher out of Tennessee, very right wing, conservative guy, and I don't remember. Oh, we got into it because the Freedom from Religion Foundation aired our Ron Reagan ad
Yes. Mm-hmm.
during the Democratic debate primaries. And he and I were having a little back and forth on Twitter, and he was claiming that this is a Christian nation. And I said, it's really not, man. I'll send you a copy of my book and you can learn a little something. And so I wrote a little, it was cheeky. It was a cheeky
It
little
was.
note. I mean,
But it was funny. You
um,
deserved it.
and then he burned the book. With a blowtorch, and I mean, we know about this because he filmed it and then put it up on social media, which was the interesting part. So I mean, not shy about seeming to be a fascist in any way, shape, or form is Greg Locke.
If anything came of it, I decided that you and I were going to be friends, whether you liked it or not, because that was hilarious.
And here we are.
And here we are. Here we are. Cheers. So let's get into the substantive part of the conversation. So I would like to have a chat, especially right now in the climate that we're in, where everybody is so heated because people are feeling what it's like to have, deprivation of, what they perceive as absolute freedoms in order to sacrifice to protect the collective. Do you see a lot of encroachments taking place from your perspective, from a legal perspective, especially working with freedom from religion? Because, just from a bystander perspective, especially being in Canada, it's not quite the same here. But I see a lot of people talking about, churches shutting down and being upset about those sorts of things. So where do you feel as though there's an intersection of the law, and what role do you feel like people like you and I, more specifically you, and other activists play in, I guess, protecting society from those ideals, and where's the line legally?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We could talk about that for the rest of the show easily, I'm sure.
We'll see where this goes.
So the first thing I'll say about it is that the line that we draw, you talked about absolute rights in the beginning of your question, and there really is only one absolute right that we possess, at least here in the United States, under our Constitution, and that is the right to think freely. You are free to believe whatever you want, whether it's motivated by a religious belief or a holy book or science. You're free to believe it, but you're not free to act on that belief. And that's a big fight that we've seen happening before COVID and before the pandemic even hit. There's these cases about, well, I don't have to make a cake for a gay wedding because my God says so. And there's a difference between believing that your God says that and then being allowed to discriminate against a citizen. That there's two different things happening there. There's the belief, and then there's the business acting on the belief. Okay, one is okay, one is not okay from a legal standpoint. Obviously, both are important. And same thing with all of our other rights that we have. We in America, we tend to think of, well, free speech. That is an absolutely unlimited right. And that's not true, right? You are not allowed to politic within a couple 100 feet of most voting places here in the United States. You're not allowed to threaten somebody. You're not allowed to defame somebody. So even these rights that we conceive of as absolute, they're not. They're all limited in some way, shape, or form. And that includes the right to exercise one's religion. And that's a big fight that we've been having for the last 2 or 3 decades here in the United States, and that is coming to a head with this pandemic. You're seeing preachers who are saying we have a right to continue to gather and worship together because we have a First Amendment right to do that, and that's not true. Right, your rights to worship are limited. I mean, even now here in the United States, churches have they have to follow building codes in most places, not all places. You can't pack 500 people into a building that's meant for 20 people.
Yeah.
That would be against the fire code. That is a limit on their ability to worship that the government has put in place that nobody complains about. So saying that you can't meet, even if it is for Easter worship, because you're going to get people killed, is a perfectly acceptable limitation on somebody's rights. And it helps if we look at two other things. One, if we flip the way we conceive of that right, and two, if we look at the data. So they're not asking for a right to worship. They're asking for a right to risk other people's lives. Mm-hmm. They're asking for a right to infect other people with a deadly virus. They're asking for a right to put additional pressure on the medical system, which we are trying to prevent that from happening. That's the right that they're really seeking. And the data is the second part of that, and it backs it up. 60% of the cases in South Korea, of COVID are tied to church worship. Reuters did a really great story about this, and it's I'll see if I can find the link and post it on my Twitter later so everybody can look at it. It shows that they did it. It's this really cool imaging story. So there's all these really cool graphs and data, and you can sort of follow this person went here. And so for instance, one worshiper in this area in South Korea went to 2 different worship services and infected 1,200 other people.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So 60% of the cases in Korea are tied to one church cluster.
Wow.
So, and you have it in Sacramento County in California, for instance, 30% of all cases were tied to worship services. And in Kansas, a quarter of the cases last month were tied to worship services. So we know that people getting together to worship are spreading this virus. So to me, it's pretty clear that you don't have a right to risk other people's lives. You don't have a right to spread a deadly disease.
Yeah. So when people talk about, and I've seen this a fair bit, the freedom to assemble, they say that that's essentially an unassailable right. Like that's part of their constitutional rights. And like I said, I'm Canadian, so I don't get it as well as you would. So I'm glad you're here. That people speak about that almost in the same fashion right now as they speak about freedom of speech. I haven't heard them as ardently for it before. So I think it's just because it's immediately relevant to them given the context of what they want to accomplish, which is keeping church doors open so that they can go in, which baffles me to a degree, because you'd have to not have, I talked to Hemant Mehta about this recently, you would have to not have a grasp on the risk that you're presenting to yourself and the other people around you to actually want that. I don't understand how you trade that off.
Or have a belief that warps your sense of what that risk really is.
That's fair too.
I mean,
there are lots of people who think that it's it's blown out of proportion, or that it's and there's conspiracy, or
I'm trying to think.
Or God will protect you. I guess that's
the one, really. I mean, there's a woman, and I'm trying to think of the exact quote. She was on the news, and
she was bathed in the blood of Jesus. She was protected,
I'm bathed in the blood of Jesus, so protected. Yeah, and I mean, and that belief. Like if you genuinely believe that, belief informs action. Like, I mean, it's not sensical, but it is at least internally coherent. But I mean, so to answer your question about freedom of assembly, all these different rights, they all come from the First Amendment. So the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. Okay, so there's 6 different rights in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, including a secular government, the free exercise of religion, speech, press, assembly, and then petitioning your government for a redress of grievances. And all of those really go back to what we were talking about in the first question, which is if you look at what those are meant to protect, they're really meant to protect the freedom of thought, right? You get to have a government that doesn't tell you what to think, and you can act on those thoughts to a certain extent. You can speak about those thoughts. You can communicate those thoughts through the press. You can get together and talk about those thoughts. You can communicate those thoughts to your government. You have a right to do all those things. But again, that doesn't mean that the actions tied to the thoughts are unlimited. So the right to think is unlimited, but the right to act is not. And that really is the central fight that we've been having here in the United States for quite a while now, unfortunately. There's this attempt to weaponize and redefine the concept of religious liberty. Historically, that was always a protection for an individual against government action. And now you're seeing it turn from that protection, from that shield, into a sword, into a weapon to impose those religious beliefs on other people. And again, that's what happened with the gay wedding cake case that we talked about a little bit already too.
Yeah, that segues actually really well into the question I was going to ask next, or at least the topic I was going to bring up next. I'm not sure if I could even formulate this into a cogent question, because I have so. I'm
a lawyer, so I can bullshit anything. You can just throw something out there.
Fantastic! You've come to the right place then. So the title of the stream that I made was like, "What is a Christian nation?" Because in the context of this scenario and many other scenarios, I consistently see it brought up that it's pulled out as essentially a trump card in a lot of grievances. When you're saying, like we need to look at this, like when it comes to things like gay marriage or trans rights, or the rights of secular people to not have to be subjected to prayer in schools, and other religious people to not have to be subjected to prayer in schools that aren't of their specific religion. It's always brought out as a trump card. Well, Christians founded this nation. Mm-hmm. This is a Christian nation. If it wasn't for the 10 Commandments, or if it wasn't for, I don't know, whatever. And that's always perplexed me, because it seems to me that it's more a human nation, and what they appeal to in the tenets of Christianity are things that are relatively common to humanity in order to get you to buy in. Like, let's not murder, let's not steal each other's stuff, let's, attempt to be good to each other, do unto others, those sorts of things that seem like they're intuitively a portion of what it's like to be a human that's existing in societal moral systems. They appeal to those things to kind of buy you in, and then label that as Christian. They say that is Christian. Like, we own that. We own these. Those are Christian things. You're borrowing from those. If you adhere to any of these things, like if you don't kill people and don't steal stuff and want people to be good to one another, then that's essentially you saying you're a Christian, even though you're denying it. And then once they get people to buy into it, or they aren't able to have somebody cogently refute that as a premise, then they start to tab things onto it. And that's where the danger is. So I guess my question is what do we do? Like, how do you start to combat that? You must come after again. Is there protections in place? Like, what do you appeal to in the way of protections from a legal standpoint to stop that?
So, I mean, there's kind of three different things I think we can talk about there. The first is, that it's critical for everyone to understand, and especially the Christians and the people who are claiming that this is a Christian nation, that there is no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. A secular government is a prerequisite to true religious liberty. And that's one of the unique things, and one of the original things about the U.S. Constitution. That was the first time that was enshrined in the law. The second thing that we can talk about is, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like to have a government that's free from religion? And the example that I like to use is a complaint that we get at the Freedom from Religion Foundation all the time. So at FFRF, we have 10 full-time attorneys on staff. We handle between 4,000 and 5,000 state church complaints from individuals out there every year. So people just contact us and say, hey, my kid's kindergarten teacher said they have to pray before they go down to lunch. Is that allowed? We say, no, it's not. We'll write to your school. We'll get it stopped. One of the complaints we get all the time is about coaches, specifically football coaches. And it's a great way to show what a secular government would look like. So a Christian nation, a government that endorses Christianity, that imposes Christianity, would be a coach at a public school getting the kids together and say, okay, kids, there is a God, his name is Jesus, and he wants you to win this football game. Go win one for Jesus Christ. Let's say a prayer. Let's go out there and do it. Okay.
Right.
Very clearly a public school coach imposing Christianity on other people's children. Not allowed. In atheist nation, which you don't hear about, and we've never gotten this complaint, it would be a coach saying, okay, kids, there is no God, life is meaningless, we're all miserable, go out there and it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Yeah, right.
Nothing matters, we have no morals.
Never
each other's faces off.
We'll eat babies after the game. Never seen that happen. It never will happen. But that's what it would look like if a coach was imposing atheism, something less of a caricature.
Yeah.
A secular government, a coach with a secular government, or adhering to that spirit, would say, okay, kids, go out there and play like we practiced, and let's win this game. Right? That's it. It's a government that's not taking a stance on religion one way or another, that is neutral about religion, that it doesn't.
Not attempting to incorporate it into day-to-day life.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is what we should all want, because then that allows us the freedom to practice it and to teach our children it if we want, and all that good stuff. So that's what it would look like. And to your final broader point, yes, it is dropped on this argument like a trump card all the time. Well, we were founded as a Christian nation. And that really is why I wrote the founding myth, why Christian nationalism is un-American. I got so tired of hearing this argument in my work at FFRF. I'd actually been working on the book before I started there. But the work at FFRF really helped me refine the argument and see all the different responses that we're getting from these Christian football coaches who are imposing prayer on other people's kids. And they're saying things like, well, we were founded as a Christian nation. We are one nation under God. And so I have the right, the First Amendment free exercise right, to have my religion on the field with me. And none of that's true, because that person is not acting as a private individual. They're acting as a government official. And when they're acting in that official capacity and wielding that government power, they aren't allowed to endorse or oppose religion one way or the other. They just are supposed to go out there and do their job.
Yeah, and it seems as though they take advantage of, or they take for granted, the privileged position that they have as a majority in society. Because if it was any other religion, they would be calling you themselves. Like if somebody was giving a Muslim prayer before they went out onto the field, they would be up in arms because they don't want those things imposed. But they don't recognize that applies to them simultaneously, because they don't understand that they have that privilege. So they revert to, well, this nation is Christian and everybody else is just a guest here, which is counter to the point, I would think, of the tenets that the country seems to have been founded on. Unless I'm wrong. Like, I don't know. I'm super
You're
Canadian.
Absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, so first of all, that is the official, well, not the official, that is the unsaid underlying goal of Christian nationalism. So let me just define it. Christian nationalism is the idea that we were founded as a Christian nation, that we're based on Judeo-Christian principles, and that we've strayed from that foundation, that we need to get back to those godly roots. And so they use that language of return, and that we used to be and now we're not, to justify all these public policy pushes or justify imposing prayer on other people's children. And that the whole point of Christian nationalism is to make it so that Christians are a special favored class and everybody else is second-class citizens. And you are absolutely right that if they had been in the minority, and when they were in the minority, we can even say historically speaking, they were all for governments that were neutral about religion and couldn't impose it. It's only once they are in the majority and achieve power, seize power in some cases, that they all of a sudden are all for non-secular governments. And I mean, again, you can see this throughout history, and I include a lot of these examples in the book, The Founding Myth, because it is just a historical truism that religious minorities favor state church separation and religious majority doesn't. And you can even see instances where it's flipped. And a minority became a majority through various upheavals, political upheavals, and they all of a sudden say, "Oh, yeah, we do get to impose our religion on you, and we're going to torture you if you don't agree with us," even though that happened to us a couple of years ago.
Yeah, or teach your
Um,
children things that you don't agree with. It
mhm.
seems as though they don't even recognize the fact that the very protections that they're attempting to overturn protect them as well.
Mhm.
And but because they feel as though they're the majority, they have this entitlement because they buy into this premise that, you know, America's Christian and we're permitting people who don't think like us to be here. We're granting you those freedoms as the majority. You should be thankful. And this attitude that, you know, this nostalgic sort of appeal to the, you know, the good old days is essentially an augmented memory of a time when they felt as though they didn't have to account for other people as much. And now they're being held accountable, and being held accountable is not the same as having your freedoms relinquished.
No, you're
It's
absolutely
just,
right.
you know, paying the piper. It's just facing up to the fact that freedoms were being diminished as a result of your actions, and now you have to be on a level playing field with other people, and you don't like that when you're the privileged class.
Yeah, and that's the way. I mean, they are confusing the erosion of an unwarranted privilege
Mm-hmm.
with persecution,
That's a good way to
and
put it.
that's absolutely not the case. I mean, and I've said this for a long time, and I say this as a lawyer, you know, who's worked in the atheist and secular movement
Mm-hmm.
and trying to keep state church separate for nearly a decade now. You know, we were never going to win this fight in the courts. We were always going to win it with demographics. And I know a lot of people, especially now, are getting disheartened about what's happening in the United States, about the flood of Christian nationalist judges who have lifetime appointments into the federal judiciary. We're close to 200 now. And it is alarming. But I always like to tell people we were never going to win this fight in the courts. We are always going to win it with demographics. And the demographics are rapidly changing in our favor. And you know, we have the arguments on our side, we have the law on our side, we have the Constitution on our side, we have facts and data and reason and science on our side, but we've also got demographics, and that's where we really are going to see things change in the future, and why I'm still hopeful, even in the midst of this massive storm of
Sometimes I don't know how
flaring.
you guys do it. It seems as though, from an outside perspective, it seems almost as though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I might be, because I'm very much outside of this, that your political system is now sort of seen as a form of mass entertainment more than it's seen as something that's serious, as an entity that affects people's day-to-day lives. And media consumption seems to be prevalent, and polarization, because it attracts more media consumption, seems to be what's more prevalent than just straight dissemination of important facts. And so, and Trump being so bombastic and ridiculous is, you know, that's a viewer windfall. So
Mhm.
it keeps like, it just seems that so media, like, politics is morphed almost into entertainment down there to a
Well, and
certain degree.
a big part of it is that our system depended to a larger extent than anybody realized on certain norms. And by that,
Oh, how do you mean? Yeah, how do you mean?
I mean that it depended on the self restraint of the individuals in the system, the respect, even if it is begrudging, for the institutions that they were a part of, for the history. And that has been utterly destroyed, I think, by the Trump and the Republican Party that has seized power under Donald Trump. We've seen that just evaporate, and it shows how fragile a lot of our systems are as a result. And in a way, there are silver linings, I think. You know, before Trump, I never would have said something like this, and it is a fundamentally undemocratic uh, House is a fundamentally undemocratic system. It is, as is the Electoral College. I mean, I'm a constitutional attorney. I kind of, you know, I feel like I know a lot of this stuff. And it has changed this whole situation. It really has exposed a lot of the flaws and the cracks in our system, and the need for a massive overhaul in certain aspects of it, including with the Senate, with the Electoral College, with our elections in general. I mean, we had the US and the Wisconsin Supreme Courts decide earlier this month that citizens, myself included, had to go out and risk the pandemic to vote in person and risk their families' lives just to go out and exercise their right to vote.
Why couldn't
There's
you
no
do a mail-in ballot just like when you're absentee? You couldn't do.
That's a wonderful question. I requested an absentee ballot. The government told us to request absentee ballots.
Yeah.
So many people requested them that the government said, "Look, we can't get these all out on time. We need an extension, basically." And so the Democratic Party sued to get that. The judge granted it, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, "Nope. Anybody, if you don't," so through no fault of our own,
Oh my
hundreds of thousands of citizens asked to have their absentee ballots, and they didn't get them on time, and we were forced to go out and vote in a pandemic because the US Supreme Court said so. It was a technicality. They exposed the technicality in another case just 2 days ago. They said the exact opposite thing in this other case. And point being, in a democracy where it is we the people, that's the first three words of our Constitution, the vote should be sacred, and the point of any court should be to protect and extend that right to vote to as many people as possible. And you have the exact opposite thing happening here constantly. One party, and the judges who are members of that party, is actively trying to prevent and prevent people from voting, disenfranchise as many people as possible. And so the only positive thing I think about the Trump administration is that it has exposed massive massive flaws in our system that we will be able to fix, and when this is all over.
My gosh, that just blows my mind. Like we would make sure people could vote. Like that, there was a massive controversy here. Just to get a little Canadian for a second, then we'll get back on track today, because we needed to get more hand sanitizer to one of our provinces, which is Quebec. There's a law in Quebec, and all of Canada, in fact, that all packaging must have both French and English in writing, in descriptions, instructions, everything must be both French and English, because we're a bilingual country, and Quebec is very, very staunchly French. There's a protection act to protect the language. In order to get hand sanitizer and bleach products, because we'd run out to people, we had to purchase hand sanitizer and bleach products that were only English labeling. And there was a massive, that's the biggest controversy that's come out of COVID, is there's just, this packaging only has English. How dare you? But when it comes to voting, I remember being in the hospital with my son when he was very, very young. He was hospitalized, and I called in and said, "I'm not going to be able to get to the ballot box. Can you please give me an alternative?" And they sent somebody to the hospital, into my hospital room, to accept my ballot for me.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean,
why don't you want people to vote?
That's the way it should work. Most people do want people to vote. There's one party, and the people in that party don't want people to vote, because if they do, they lose power. The more people vote, the more likely they are to lose power. And so they do everything they can to stop it. So one of the things I do here in the United States, in Wisconsin, is I'm a poll watcher on election days. So that just means I use my law degree and my license to help people vote. And if there's a poll worker who says, "Oh no, you're not able to for this reason," I go help that person, and we challenge. Sometimes those end up as court cases. I've never had to do that, but one of the parties here, they pass laws that make it confusing, and they just you have to give us an ID that has your picture on it, and you have to bring a bill to prove that your address is this, and all this stuff, and your signature has to match if you do send a mail-in ballot, and all these different things. And they act like they all hang it on this idea that there is voter fraud, which is just simply not true. The only real case of voter fraud recently was in North Carolina, and that was the Republican Party committing it. And I mean, so the point being, it's done deliberately. It's done to disenfranchise people, to prevent them from voting, or to make it so confusing and hard that they just throw up their hands and say, "Well, I'm not even going to bother to go vote." I mean, there's a podcast called Opening Arguments that I go on and talk about legal stuff from time to time. And I did a whole chat about why this Chat is a nice word. I was pissed off. This was like days after it. I was very angry. I'm still bitter about it. I mean,
Was it more of a rant?
It was more of a rant. It was April 7th was the election. I'm still talking about it. So, I mean, and I posted on my Twitter feed the other day. I was like, it's been more than 2 weeks now. I wonder if there really was a spike in COVID cases in Wisconsin because we forced all these people, 1.5 million people voted. And I don't remember what the number of absentee ballots was. I think it was like more than 1 million. So mostly absentee. But, in Milwaukee, we have 180 plus polling locations normally, and poll workers didn't want to go work because
why would they? They don't want to get
yeah. So they only had enough people to staff 5 locations. So you had people waiting in line for 4 and 5 hours to try to vote.
Shoulder
with
to
all
shoulder?
these. I mean, they tried to social distance them 6 feet apart, but still, you're out in a crowd of people for 4 or 5 hours to try to go vote. I mean, and you
have to be so dedicated too. So many people would just give up because they don't have time. They have to work. They have children. Wow.
No, I mean, I had a friend who really wanted to vote, didn't get her absentee ballot in time. And so she was faced with the choice, okay, I have to go stand in line for a couple hours with my kid or not vote. I can't leave my kid at home alone. I can't give my kid over to childcare right now because we are under a quarantine. And the courts, so point being, she didn't go vote. And, the courts that issued these orders forcing us to go out there and do it, it was the first order the U.S. Supreme Court ever issued from their own homes.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So they wouldn't even go into court to issue the order that was forcing people?
That forced us. Same with the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Holy smokes.
Unbelievable. So anyway.
Wow, no wonder so many of you guys are so mad when you're talking to me. I'm like,
yeah. It's a lot of our system is broken. I think the guts are still there. Right now, we're at a place right now where I hope everybody listening takes this to heart. Things are not to the point where they are so broken that they can't be fixed right now. Everything that has happened can be fixed. It's shining a light on areas that we need to fix, and we can do that. Trump and the Christian nationalists are causing a massive amount of damage. These 180 plus judges are causing a massive amount of damages, but we are still at a point where we can recover and we can fix it. There's a lot of work to be done in the future, but we will be able to do so.
Do you see a wave of in brazenness or continues more attempts on encroachment upon the line between church and state? And so is there like a surge in that you're seeing because people feel emboldened?
Oh yeah. I mean, we noticed that. Yeah, we noticed that very early on under this administration. We called it the Trump effect in the House. And it actually ended up getting that label. Some scholars have studied it too. They study it more in the racism sense. Yeah. And we did notice that a lot of the violations we were getting were more blatant and more brazen, and that people government officials and Christian nationalists felt more entitled to clearly violate what the Constitution says in the last 3 years. And so that is something we've been fighting against. And it's another reason that I'm really thrilled that the founding myth came out when it did. And it really does address a lot of the bad arguments that their side has. And I think it corrects the historical record to leave no doubt that the United States was not founded as a Christian nation. And not only that it's a good thing we weren't founded as a Christian nation, because the principles of Judeo-Christianity are so fundamentally opposed to the principles that our nation was built on that it's fair to say that Christianity is un-American. And that is the sort of
that's such a bold statement. I can't wait to read my comment section. I heard you talk to Jesse Lee Peterson the other day, and I listened to it. That's what sparked this conversation happening, actually, Andrew, because I saw you said that you were talking to Jesse Lee Peterson. I was like, Andrew, why though? Why are you doing that? But it was actually a good listen because you brought that up, and that is a bold statement. But when he appealed to the 10 Commandments, like I said to you before, you were just like, which ones?
Yeah.
You didn't even know what to say.
And you notice he didn't answer, people can answer. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that I get into in the book. I have a whole section in the founding myth on the 10 Commandments. And that's actually where the book began. it really started out as a law review article that I was going to write, and I was just going to. There was a Supreme Court judge that said, yes, of course, the Ten Commandments influenced American law and government, and I thought when I read that, I'm like, well, that's definitely not right. I'm going to write a little law review article and explain why this is wrong, and it kind of just got really out of hand. Yeah. And so that's the sort of nucleus that the book ended up being built around, and it's part 3 in the book. And the first question I asked in the first chapter of that part is, well, which 10 commandments supposedly influenced the founding of the United States of America?
Goat boiling is usually the one that people refer to. That's the one that everybody knows.
It is. Yeah. And I mean, that is in the Bible, that is the first set that is called the 10 Commandments. Yeah. And so most people don't know that. I mean, so for your listeners' edification, there are 4 different sets of 10 Commandments in any given Bible: Exodus 20, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 5, and Deuteronomy 27. And then different religions translate them differently, as do different languages and different translations of the Bible. And, to us, this may seem like small, minor differences. Like, it's not a big deal. But, the difference between not being able to murder and not being able to kill is the difference between being able to defend yourself if somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night or not. The difference between not making graven images and not making idols, I don't know what it is, and I don't care, but the Christian church, Christendom split. They had a civil war over that difference in the 8th and 9th centuries. It's called the Iconoclast controversy. They disagreed and killed each other over the disagreement. And that's because there's no such thing as a small religious difference, right? If you pair absolute certainty on the basis of no evidence, you're guaranteed to get violence in the end. Anyway, so many different sets of 10 commandments in any given Bible, and then between the different religions. And the first question that you should ask if you hear, well, the United States was based on the 10 commandments, is, well, which 10? And most people can't answer that. The answer you invariably get is, don't kill, don't steal. And then they usually say don't murder too, even though they've already said don't kill. But
they ignore the worship no other God above me, and you shall not take my name in vain. And those were really good points that I thought you make too. Like, you shall not take my name in vain. Freedom of speech, there it goes. Can't say, oh my God anymore.
The 10 Commandments are fundamentally un-American. I mean, absolutely un-American. I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. That's how they begin, how most people think the 10 Commandments begin. And that is absolutely un-American. It conflicts wholly with the First Amendment. You can have as many gods or no gods. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Again, free speech and free exercise. You're free to do that here. And it gets worse too. The punishment, that commandment goes on. And it says, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who disobey me. And this was a really interesting moment in the Jesse Lee Peterson interview, because
he was like,
he ended up defending punishing innocent children for the crimes of their parents, which is really striking. I mean, and that is fundamentally un-American. It's not only is it written into every aspect of our judicial system, where we would never even consider punishing a child for a parent's crime. It's also written into the Constitution. There's a few crimes defined in the Constitution, including treason. And in our Constitution, it says that no attainder of treason shall work a corruption of blood, which means if you're guilty of treason, your kids don't get punished for it. I mean, so it's actually fundamentally anti-biblical. It is anti-10 Commandments. So to say that we were founded on the 10 Commandments is just to not know what the 10 Commandments say. And then I know everybody's thinking, yeah, but you still didn't answer the don't kill, the don't steal, the no adultery, all that stuff. And the answer is in the founding myth. I promise you there's a very good answer for this. And I don't like to give everything away in the interviews. So people
no spoilers.
Go get a copy. Yeah. But let me just do one final sort of caveat. The question that I ask people is, because I know there's a couple people out there saying, well, I know ways that the 10 Commandments have influenced American founding. And there are. Slavery is a great example. Adultery even is a reasonable example. America has long had a fetish for legislating sex. And the question is, can you name a principle that is unique and original to Christianity that positively influenced the founding of the United States of America. And that can't really be done. I've heard a couple answers that are not really heavily influential, things like, oh, well, we have Sundays off, and I get into that in the book, but like,
you guys have Sundays
really.
off?
I mean, not really. It's just not. They're weak arguments to begin with, and if that's your only argument, then I feel like I've already won anyway. So anyway, I really would encourage everybody to go pick up the copy of the book. There's a ton of information on there, especially if you've ever been in an argument, either online or in person, about whether or not we're founded as a Christian nation.
I have. I'm not even American.
It happens to everybody. So
it always devolves down to morals. Mm-hmm. It always devolves down to morals. Every time, that's what it comes down to. Whether it's the 10 Commandments or God's laws written on our hearts is what it comes down to. Once I burn through the 10 Commandments, it always comes down to, well, God's law is written on our hearts, mm-hmm. and God guided them because they were Christian. That's another good one. Before we take questions, we'll take questions, guys. I'll read the super chat soon. I promise. I see them. I promise I will. If you have questions, at me, at Shannon Q, or send a super chat nobody's gonna have questions for me. If you have questions for Andrew, but this
do
is
it that same way.
This is the other one that I wanted to ask you very, very badly, because I hear this all the time, and as a Canadian, I have no idea how to answer it, and also somebody who doesn't really study American history at all in general. People always say, well, they were all Christian, mm-hmm. so since they were Christian, that means Christian nation, because the dudes were Christian. So so I like to go back to that original question that I just asked. I will concede, for the sake of argument, even though it's not true. Let's just say all the founders of the United States were Jesus rose from the dead Christians. Yeah. Okay? Believed every word of the Bible. You would still have to show that the beliefs that they held influenced the Constitution, that they talked about it at the Constitutional Convention, that those beliefs were infused into the documents that they based our government on. And you absolutely cannot do that. Not only is our Constitution godless, it was the first Constitution to be godless. It was the first Constitution that did not cite power in a supernatural being, but in we the people. It was the first Constitution that separated state and church. It was many of the principles in it are fundamentally opposed to biblical principles. And that's really what I try to show in the book. The book is not just answering the question, was the United States founded as a Christian nation? I take it a step farther. I show that those Judeo-Christian principles are fundamentally opposed to American principles, that Christianity really is un-American in that sense. So my goal in the book, and I think I succeed, is to utterly destroy the Christian nationalist identity and give people better arguments to do the same thing. Very cool. All right, I'll go into question. The first question that I see is from David Worley, and it says, Shannon, which one of you has the better hair? That's hard. That's a hard question.
You do. I concede.
You concede? Okay. I do. I've been handed the victory. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I've been handed the win on that one. So first super chats from Duke, and then I'll go to the other questions. American Christians are incredibly entitled, and that came in earlier on.
Indeed.
From Gilly Foyle, Miss Q, it happened in my hometown, El Paso, Texas, last August. So sorry. Oh, stay strong. Mr. Seidel's book is so enlightening. Thank you. And there you go. You've got a fan. Somebody likes your book.
Thank you.
Sorry, bad things happen sometimes to good people. From Vibrantly Brantley. Thank you. Just some small support. Keep up the good work. Thank you. I feel bad, Andrew. None of these requests.
No.
These are all people being
this is great. This is great. You're getting I mean, of the two things we've talked about, that was by far the more important of the two, and I think like the support that you're getting is fantastic. I'm thrilled to see it.
I don't want to take it away from you though, because I've been very excited to talk to you. So Maxie's Mr. Mom, Shannon Q, who would Andrew rather have run the United States, Trump or Pope Francis? Oh, that's an interesting question for you, Andrew. Trump or Pope Francis? Would you rather?
I mean, I think I would rather have the Pope if we're just assuming the person is filling the role of president. Pope Fluffy, as Paul Fidalgo of CFI dubbed him. not having the absolute power and having the checks on his power, I think would be very interesting to see. And, this is a thing that people ask a lot about. Well, if you lose Trump, you end up with Pence, and Pence is terrible. Yeah, Pence is the devil I know.
You feel like you can work your way around that? He's more predictable?
Yeah. And I feel very, very similarly about Pope. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would take the Pope. I mean, I would take a vegetable at this point.
Yeah, you literally have no idea what that guy's gonna say.
Yeah,
I mean, everything he says, it's either I was joking or it was misrepresented. I'm like, but I heard it.
I mean, obviously, there are a number of big black marks against the Pope, including the fact that he's covered up the institutionalization and rape and torture of little children for a long time, and he has the absolute power to change that and hasn't done it, which says a lot about his moral compass. But
and continues to potentially do something that perpetuates it. That's an impossible choice. That's a Sophie's choice.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, that is really hard. It's interesting question though. It's interesting thought experiment.
It is. Yeah.
Vibrantly Brantley, what brand are those headphones? Are they vintage? That's clearly for you.
I reserve the right to alter my previous answer. These are Panasonic RP-HTX 7s.
There you go. Question answered. From Duke again. Shannon, if all dizzles are doozles and all whistles are woozles, what is the circumference of Kent Hovind's head? Thank you, Duke, for making me read that. I don't know the circumference of Kent Hovind's head.
Sounds like Dr. Seuss knows the answer to that one.
Yeah, probably. All right. So from Nemo Utopian, does Andrew worry that someday Christian historical revisionism could wipe out our known history? That's a good question.
I mean, it's a worry. It's a concern. There are people like David Barton, for instance, who are these just awful Christian nationalists who don't care for truth.
Who's David Barton, if you don't mind me asking? I don't know who he is.
David Barton is a Christian nationalist. He's a historical revisionist. He calls himself a historical and constitutional expert. He's neither. He's got a degree from Oral Roberts University, which is a really heavily Christian university that has gotten in trouble for having segregated dorms and things like that. His degree is in Christian education, which strikes me as something more akin to indoctrination. And he's brags regularly about, I don't know what the last time the number I heard was, but he says he owns like 20,000 original source documents, meaning the original letters that one founder wrote to another, for instance. Why on earth
would that personal human own those and not turn them over to like some sort of government museum or like?
Well, and that's the reason that I worry. This is a person who has a very, very clear agenda, whose agenda is to rewrite our history, to erase any sort of attempt the founders made to have a secular nation and to rewrite it so that through this Christian nationalist lens. And has been doing it for decades, since he has an outfit called Wall Builders that's brazen in this. And so that there are things that alarms me about it. And that we do have a lot of institutions, for instance, the Library of Congress, that does some really great work on this. But even there are some they're run by people, and they're controlled by Congress. It is the Library of Congress, quite literally. And things are the way they are right now. So I mean, it is something I worry about. It's one of the reasons I wanted the founding myth to be so well sourced. If you read the book, you will notice that there are extensive footnotes. Just about every factual statement has a citation to an original source. I had 2 different fact checkers before my publisher even got a copy of the book, the manuscript, go through it. I paid them a bounty. For every error they could find, I ended up paying in liquid. Both fact checkers, Ryan Jane, who's an attorney at FFRF, and Colin McNamara, who's an attorney at the American Humanist Association, a year apart, each tried to rip the book to shreds and find every factual error, every error I made when I was transcribing a quote, anything. So I feel very, very good about the history in the book, as opposed to David Barton, who got caught making up and inventing quotes for his book. So,
oh my God, that's insane to me.
His book, for instance, about Thomas Jefferson was so bad. It was published by Thomas Nelson Publishers, which publishes Bibles.
Yeah.
And, and Thomas Nelson pulled his book about Thomas Jefferson off the shelves because it was so full of factual errors. and they publish Bibles.
Oh
So
my God, wow.
yeah, yeah,
That's intense. One of the mottos that I have on my channel is advocate for your own understanding. So even when I'm speaking, I want you to check my sources. And I think
yep.
that so many people don't realize that they're they're taking advantage of by people that they place their trust in media and in culture and even in education systems. And like what you really need to do is learn how to do source methodology, how to advocate for yourself, how to engage in strong reasoning skills. So many people hear something that appeals to them, and people have the artifice of authority, and they'll just appeal to that. And it sounds like that's what this guy is. Like, how do you authenticate that he has this many letters, or can you like
I
he
mean,
can just like
he just says
he
it. Yeah, I
just
mean,
says,
and I don't know. I mean, he like does all these video shoots in his library of it too. But and you remind me, there's a great Abraham Lincoln quote that is right on point. It's always fact check the quotes that you see on the internet. Abraham Lincoln.
I heard that
It's just,
Abraham Lincoln said
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I
Anyway,
heard
yeah,
that. I knew that already, actually.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
there when it happened. I was there when he said that. All right. So Melik Lindell said, what are some of the more pressing issues that FFRF may be looking into currently regarding secularism, and how can others become involved? Thank you, Melik. Good question.
Yeah, good question. I mean, the big thing we're dealing with right now is obviously the pandemic. There are tons of days of prayer that are being used to combat the pandemic, which is obviously pointless. The bigger concern is exempting churches from stay-at-home orders,
Mm,
which we've seen. So FFRF has actually launched a whole COVID resources page on our website
okay.
that includes a legal memo that people can download. They can send it to local officials, to health officials, to police departments, explaining what the law says and what the law requires, that you can't exempt churches and you can't refuse to enforce these orders against churches. So we've been trying to work with the governors across the country to get them to ensure that these orders are including churches, and that we're not letting these pastors put other people's lives at risk. And again, it's not just the people they're not asking for a right to worship and just risk the lives of the worshipers, because those people are then the next day they're going to the grocery store or to Home Depot, which is what a lot of people are doing these days. And so they're risking everybody else's life, not just the people who are going to church.
Awesome. See if I can put that link in the description too. So I'm not sure if I understand the next question. It's from Brutus Magnuson. It says, what do you think of a new sexual movement focused on developing skills in a newly liberated society? This would manage new anxieties after sex RVLTN. I'm not sure how to interpret that, Brutus. I'm sorry. I'm all for new sexual movements. If that's any consolation. But I'm not sure how to answer your question. And for that,
It,
I
it might
apologize.
it might have been related to when we were talking about the American fetish for legislating sex.
Oh,
It sounds like
maybe.
maybe. I mean, I have a whole chapter in the founding myth on the history of that, and this is one of those influences that I concede in the book. Like, this Christianity really did have this influence on American law and government,
Hmm.
but it's this poisonous influence that we're still trying to escape from today. But there's a whole chapter on that. If Brutus Magnuson, if that is what you were talking about, direct you to that chapter. Otherwise, I got nothing for you.
Fair enough. And Duke is funny. He said, "You're a hobbit, Harry." And that is funny. And I'll take this as the last question, then I'll let Andrew be free. How does Andrew see the future of evangelicals as kingmakers for the right? From Nemo Utopian. It's an interesting question because you must see a little bit of that kind of in Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Christian nationalism is what carried Donald Trump into power
Mm.
in 2016. I mean, and I get into this in the introduction of the founding myth. I explain what the data shows us, what we know. I mean, there's always been this undercurrent, and there have been different waves of Christian nationalism throughout American history. And Trump tapped into this undercurrent of Christian nationalism and wrote it into the most powerful office in the history of the world. And I think it's a mistake to label them evangelicals. For, again, reasons I get into in the book. There's also a great book by Andrew Whitehead and his co-author, Taking America Back for God, which really gets into a lot of the data and the demographics of Christian nationalism and why it's calling them white evangelicals. Even that is a mistake. They are Christian nationalists. And I think their power is on the wane. They
You think these are like the death pangs? Like,
Yes, these are the death throes. They are not going to go gently into the obsolescence for which they are bound. They can look at the demographics, they can read the studies as well as we can. On Sunday mornings, at least before COVID, they would wake up, they would go to church, and they would look out, and instead of seeing young smiling faces back, look, they'd see, empty pews and old folks. The demographics are shifting in this country. And I wrote a story for Religion News Service right after the 2018 election here in the States, detailing some of the data from that election, which showed that the nones, N-O-N-E-S, the non-religious, the atheists, the agnostics, are really starting to seize political power and coalesce into a voting bloc in a way that we have not seen. And I can tell you from the other side of that, from walking around the halls of Congress with other groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, that things are changing. And I have very high hopes for the future. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. And they're doing massive damage right now, but they are going to lose and we are going to win, not least of all because we are right and they are wrong.
very cool. Well, I will leave everybody with that. Before we go, though, I want you to tell everybody about what you're doing on Twitter on Thursday, because I think it's a fun thing.
Yeah, this was just sort of a last minute idea I had. Atheists at the movies. So hashtag AATM. So a bunch of Twitter atheists, Lucian Greaves of the Satanic Temple, Chrissy Stroop, Leanne Lord, who's a comedian extraordinaire, is probably going to be there. Debbie Goddard, Gail Jordan, who's the most dangerous woman in Tennessee, is going to be there. And we're going to be watching God's Not Dead and live tweeting about it. So people can follow that hashtag on Twitter, and they don't have to watch the movie. They can just watch us suffer and complain about it, or they can watch along. So this actually stemmed from the historians at the movie, is a thing that I do from time to time. I follow. I'm not a historian, so I don't tweet about it. But they watch things like National Treasure, and then they tweet about the actual history underlying it. So I thought we would take a page out of their book and try to build some community during this difficult time.
And I was going to do it too, but I will be streaming on my channel. I'm a little sad that I'm not going to be involved in that because I'm going to be here. Too. But I told you, if you do it again, let me know. And
we will. And if it goes well, hopefully, we won't just do shitty Christian movies. We'll do some real movies. This actually, so the original idea for this is 9 years old. Mm-hmm. We hosted at our house with some of FFRF's interns a shitty Christian movie night. And we got together and watched some. So we get complaints about Christian teachers showing these movies in public schools. And there's a football movie called Facing the Giants that's just so bad. And that was the first one that we watched. And so it was all the attorneys and all the FFRF interns, and we were watching it and kind of doing like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 type thing. And it was a lot of fun. And so I kind of revamped or reawoken that idea for
I promise you, I watched the worst Christian movie that's ever been made last night.
What was it?
It's called Assassins 33 AD.
Oh my goodness.
You don't want... Let me tell you the premise before we go. It's bad. So there's an atheist scientist who's brilliant. He gets a Christian girlfriend. The two of them, along with two other random people who, religion indiscriminate, nobody knows, get a job at this lab because they've been hired by this Muslim billionaire. The Muslim billionaire who's from the Middle East, because they show a scene that he's from the Middle East, is played by a very, very clearly Latino actor. Very clearly. Very clearly. They invent a time machine, and the Muslim billionaire actually turns out to be a Muslim extremist because Muslim extremists killed his parents in front of him, and apparently that made him extra Muslim and hateful
totally
towards
checks out
Jesus and
totally checks out.
Extra extremist Muslim and hateful towards Jesus. And so he decided that he was going to fund this project to build a time machine to go back in time and kill Jesus. And I won't go farther than that. That's the first 20 minutes. It's 2 hours long. And let me tell you, bud, there's no way you'll find one worse. There is no way. Okay. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
Okay.
The worst
I will
thing.
Challenge. Watch Suing the Devil and tell me if it is worse. Suing the devil. Suing the devil. They actually
I don't
got.
know if I have it in me after
They
yesterday.
got what's his name? They got
What's it called?
that suing the devil. Malcolm McDonald, I think
Malcolm
that's Scottish.
McDowell?
No, yeah,
No.
yeah, yes. He plays the devil. Yes, they clearly spent all of their budget on him, and the movie is hilariously bad. The whole premise is it's this Christian kid and he sues the devil for $7 trillion in the International Human Rights Court, which is based in Australia, which is not a thing. And it is hilarious from beginning to end.
Yeah, but were the angels that the women saw in the tomb actually time travelers with glow sticks?
But Malcolm McDowell, they did some special effects, and his face like turns blue, and he's walking into the courtroom, and he's like all cool with his glasses, and he's like, and it's like
there's no way. We'll have a movie off. I'm imploring my audience to watch both.
Yes. Okay. That's a great idea. Yeah. Have everybody watch both, and then report to us, and which one we'll make them do it, and then yeah. Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. There's a reason you're a professional at this, and I'm just
Oh, is that what I am? I'm not at all.
Okay, yeah, I like that idea a lot. But also, we are going to be looking for other movies for Atheists at the Movies.
Should they hashtag Atheists at the Movies so that they can
hashtag AATM AATM. So yeah, I mean, we'll if this is something people enjoy, we'll do it more. We'll maybe try to set it up regularly on a night that works for everybody, and not just pick terrible Christian movies, like also pick some really interesting, good movies. You know, there's a couple great free thought filmmakers out there, like Jeremiah Kamara, who's been at a couple of FFRF conventions. He's got I think he's got a movie on Prime right now, Amazon Prime, that might be a good one. So anyway, not just terrible ones, though. All of the people who are watching your channel right now have to go watch both of those movies and tell us which one is worse.
Yeah, Assassins.
Not previews.
No.
Previews. The whole movie.
You have to sit through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You have to sit through both of them. I had to sit through one. Andrew had to sit through the other. You have to sit through both. That's the deal.
It's true.
It only seems fair. And leave comments below or tag us on Twitter and let us know which is worse, because there's no way that anything's worse than Assassins 33 AD. Haley Montag is in it from like The Hills or whatever. What's Heidi Montag?
I don't know.
I didn't know who she was either.
My ignorance is going to just shine through right here. Yeah. I don't know, but that's an okay thing to say.
Every character in it dies twice, including Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna leave everybody.
I mean, the time travel. I mean, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I think it's best we leave it there. Okay.
Yeah. We're done now. All right, everybody. I'm gonna put on my end screen because like Andrew said, I'm incredibly professional. They can't see us anymore, but they can see the end screen because that's where I have to put things when I'm done, like more videos that you would like to watch, because all my videos are amazing and I'm really good at doing YouTube. Thank you everybody for watching, and as always, help elevate the discourse.